On the first day of 1942, on a beach on the Kerch Peninsula, a German anti-tank crew climbed into a steel box with no roof, 30 degrees below zero. The wind came off the Black Sea and went straight through the open compartment, and the loader pressed his bare palm against the gun shield to check the elevation. The skin tore off when he pulled it away. Naval guns from the Soviet fleet began walking shells inland, and a round burst in the air above the trees and showered the box with shrapnel and frozen splinters. By the time the T-26 tanks came over the dunes, the crew had been awake for 30 hours and couldn't feel their feet. They knocked out 16 of them anyway. Half the men in that box never walked again. Frankenstein Machines. 6 months earlier, the German army had crossed the Soviet border believing its anti-tank guns could kill anything that drove. Then a T-34 came out of a wheat field, and the 37mm anti-tank gun, the standing weapon of every German infantry division, bounced off it like a thrown rock. The men working the gun watched their shells skitter off the sloped armor and disappear into the trees behind the tank. They started calling the gun the door knocker, a weapon that knocked politely on the enemy's armor and did nothing else. Word got back to the Army Ordnance Office in Berlin, and the bureaucrats there did the only thing left to do. They took the chassis of an obsolete Czech tank that Germany had stolen in 1939, mated it to a captured Soviet 76mm gun pulled out of the wreckage of the summer's battles, and bolted on a thin steel box to protect the crew from rifle fire. The box had no roof and no turret. The gun couldn't traverse more than a few degrees in either direction, which meant the driver had to physically turn the entire vehicle to aim, pointing the thinnest part of his armor at whoever was about to shoot back. They called the machine the Marder, the Martin. It was a Frankenstein, and they knew it. They built it anyway. They sent the men east to fight in it, blind on the right. By 1944, the Marder was already a relic, and the next box in the line was a machine called the Hetzer, the Bader. On paper, it looked like progress. Sloped armor, low silhouette, a real roof, clean lines in the magazine drawings. The drawings never showed the inside. The Hetzer's gun loaded from the right side of the breech, but there was no room on the right side of the gun, so the loader was placed on the left, which meant every shell weighing 33 pounds had to be lifted from a rack behind him, swung across his body, and rammed home left-handed over a hot recoil guard, while the gunner sat 8 inches from his shoulder. Loaders came out of training with torn rotator cuffs before they ever saw combat, and when the commander buttoned up the hatch, no one in the vehicle could see anything to the right. Not the gunner, not the driver, not the loader. The Hetzer had 0 working periscopes on its right side. The Russians figured this out quickly, and they began flanking from the right on purpose. A Soviet platoon commander would send one T-34 to draw fire from the front while 2 more circled wide. By the time the German driver heard the engines on his blind side, a shell had already punched through the 20mm side plate. 20mm is the thickness of 3 nickels stacked together. The shell went through it like wet cardboard, and the crew never saw the tank that killed them. The Kursk Pyres. In July of 1943, near a Russian railway town called Kursk, the German army deployed its newest answer to the T-34, a 65-ton machine called the Ferdinand, 200mm of armor across the front. No tank shell in the Soviet inventory could pierce it. The crews of the 653rd Heavy Anti-Tank Battalion climbed into the 91 vehicles delivered to the line believing they were unkillable, and for the first few engagements that promise held. They watched Soviet shells flatten themselves against the front plate and drop into the dirt. By the end of the second week, more than 50 of them were burning hulks scattered across the steppe, and almost none of them had been killed by a Soviet tank. The Ferdinand was so heavy that its Porsche electric drive system overheated on slight inclines and caught fire from the inside. It had no machine gun. Soviet infantry learned this within 48 hours, and they began running up to the immobilized vehicles in pairs, pouring gasoline through the engine grills and lighting them with rags. The crew of Ferdinand 102 was forced to climb out of a vehicle that was killing itself, set demolition charges against their own armor, and detonate it before the Soviets could capture it. The crew of Ferdinand 112 lost a track to a mine and blew their own machine to scrap in the middle of the steppe. The crew of Ferdinand 102 didn't get out. They burned inside the thing that was supposed to make them invincible. For the men who didn't die in the machine broke them in a different way. The Apathy Report. On the 1st of September 1943, 2 months after Kursk ended, a German general named Otto Wöhler sat down in a command post behind the line of the 8th Army and wrote a letter to High Command. He was not the kind of man who wrote letters like this. Wöhler was a career staff officer, loyal to the regime, careful with his words. But he had been watching his army come apart for 60 days, and he sat down at a typewriter and started telling the truth. He wrote that his anti-tank crews and his infantry had been in continuous combat for 2 months without rotation. He wrote that only 15 to 20% of his lost officers and NCOs were being replaced. He wrote that the replacements arriving from Germany were poorly trained and showed, in his words, little fighting spirit. And then, in a sentence the regime would never have authorized him to write in peacetime, he put it plainly. Over-fatigue, he wrote, makes people completely apathetic. The High Command's answer was not rest. The answer was a standing order. Any crew whose vehicle broke down in combat would be assumed to have sabotaged it on purpose. The men who survived to walk back to German lines after their Marders threw a track or their Hetzers blew a transmission found military police waiting for them with rope. The police wore heavy metal gorgets on chains around their necks. The men called them the chain dogs. They hanged tank crews for cowardice from telephone poles all the way back to Berlin. The ones they didn't hang, they shoved into penal infantry battalions. Les Paradis. 3 years before Wöhler wrote his report, before the Eastern Front existed at all, an anti-tank company of the 3rd SS Division Death's Head pushed into a French village called Le Paradis on the 27th of May, 1940. The British 2nd Royal Norfolks had been holding a farm building near the village against orders to retreat, and by mid-afternoon they had run out of ammunition. 97 of them surrendered. They were marched into the yard of a barn belonging to a man named Louis Creton. The SS captain in command was a 29-year-old named Fritz Knöchlein. He had 2 machine guns set up at the entrance to the yard. He gave the order. The Norfolks were cut down where they stood, and the SS troops walked through the bodies afterward with bayonets. 2 men crawled out from under their dead friends that night. Their names were Albert Pooley and William O'Callaghan. They lived to testify, and they put Knöchlein in front of a British military court after the war. Knöchlein was hanged in 1949. The men who pulled the triggers that day, the anti-tank crews of the 14th Company, went on to the Eastern Front and crewed the open-topped boxes at Kerch, the burning Ferdinands at Kursk, the blind Hetzers at the end. They carried what they did at Le Paradis with them into every vehicle that came after. The shell in the face. By the winter of 1944, the hunters had become the hunted. The Allies had landed in Normandy in June and were grinding east, and the Red Army was no longer breaking against German lines. It was rolling over them. In December, in a wooded stretch of the Alsace region of northeastern France, an American tank destroyer crew engaged a tall, boxy German machine called the Jagdpanzer 4/70. The German crews who drove it had a nickname for it. They called it Guderian's Duck, because the long 75mm gun on its nose made the front end ride so heavy that the suspension wore out faster than the factory could replace it. 80mm of sloped armor across the front. It was supposed to be nearly impenetrable. The American gunner fired once. The armor-piercing round hit the front plate dead center, dug itself almost all the way through the steel, and stopped, fused permanently into the face of the vehicle, sticking out into the cold air like a knife in a forehead. The shell did not kill the crew. It did something worse. It told them the war was over. They climbed out of the drivable, intact hunting tank, left it on the road, and walked away into the Alsatian woods. The vehicle is still sitting in a French museum today, with the American shell still wedged in its armor, 80 years later, refusing to come out. The Tiger of Vitebsk. A year earlier, in the snow north of Vitebsk in Belarus, a 28-year-old lieutenant named Albert Ernst climbed into the open compartment of a Nashorn, a rhinoceros, and went hunting. The Nashorn was an 88mm gun on a thinly armored, open-top chassis, 30mm of plate around the fighting compartment. A single rifle round, fired from the right angle, could kill the gunner. On the 23rd of December, 1943, with the Red Army pouring westward through a gap in the German line, Ernst found a column of Soviet T-34s at long range and began firing. 21 shells went into the breach. 14 of them came back as kills. The German press named him the Tiger of Vitebsk, and Hitler awarded him the Knight's Cross. The reality was that he had spent the day standing in a roofless steel box at the bottom of a collapsing front, killing tanks faster than the press could spell his name, and it had changed nothing. The Red Army kept coming. The line behind him kept breaking. By the spring of 1945, that same man, promoted to captain, was commanding the 512th Heavy Anti-Tank Battalion, or what was left of it. 13 Jagdtigers, the heaviest hunting tanks ever built, 70 tons each, with a 128mm gun bolted to the front. On paper, each one was the most lethal anti-tank weapon in the war. In practice, they sat where they had stopped, because Ernst had run out of fuel. He had run out of men. The Ruhr pocket had collapsed around him. On the 16th of April, 1945, in the town square of a place called Iserlohn, Albert Ernst defied Hitler's last order to fight to the death and surrendered every one of his vehicles to Major General Walter Lauer of the American 99th Infantry Division without firing a shot. He climbed down out of the box for the last time. He walked into American captivity, and he lived. The men of Kursk, the crews of the burning Ferdinands at Kursk, the loaders blind on the right side of the Hetzer, the boys hanged from telephone poles by the chain dogs. None of them got that walk. They had been put inside a machine that was built badly by a regime that hated them to fight a war they could not win. The box closed around them, and it never opened again.